Hi, everyone. I'm Christine Hermon. I am the head of product at Embrace, and so we are a mobile-only tool helping developers monitor and debug issues, and we really get into the nitty-gritty detail. And yeah, fun fact, I am a certified yoga instructor.
Hi, my name is David Yates. I'm a student and practitioner of modern software development techniques. I've been teaching Agile and DevOps for about a decade. I've worked in a number of industry. My fun fact is my favorite artists are Meryl Streep, Thomas McKnight, and Bruce Springsteen.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Thomas McGonigal, and I'm a DevOps practitioner myself. I've been heavily involved in DevOps for the past 13 years, and I've worked across all sorts of industries and organizations, and I'm just very passionate about DevOps. My fun fact is I was one of the very first puppet masters back in 2008, and it's just a tremendous pleasure to be here. Thank you to the Embrace team for having us. David and I go way back. He and I are close personal friends, and he actually spoke at my wedding. And we have some groupthink, and I think everyone will enjoy our discussion today. And it's such a pleasure to be talking with Christine and the three of us, kind of sorting out this whole mobile DevOps scenario. Thank you very much.
So I guess I wanted to kick off the conversation about with a little bit of history of DevOps. So at its core, DevOps is a technical and cultural focus on teamwork and software development, software delivery. So it begins with what does the dev team actually ship out that the ops team now has to take care of in the wild, if you will. And so I guess, Tom, I wanted to start out with you. What is your experience in terms of how DevOps has evolved since this diagram was first concocted about 8 years ago?
Oh, thank you, David. For me, I predate DevOps and really kind of the nascent framework that came out, that DevOps came out of. And I think it's important to know that in the early days, we were calling it agile operations. And this is back when cloud was first in existence, and mobile and Ruby on Rails was just first in existence, and there was all these things in the industry that were really nascent, and we thought of it as an operations problem, and making operations as agile as possible, and moving from on-premise to the cloud and all that good stuff. But very quickly, the term DevOps came out, and it was coined by this fellow Patrick Dubois. And I've always thought of it personally as developing operations. It's the application of development best practices to DevOps, to operations. And that has a lot to do with me and my operations background. I spent the first part of my career in operations, the first 7-8 years of my career in operations. And what we're looking at here is this 3 ways. And if anyone has read the Phoenix Project, it's coined and it's discussed heavily by Gene Kim and his co-authors in the Phoenix Project. And the first way, I think David probably has the best handle on articulating. I'm going to actually pass the ball back to David, if you wouldn't mind talking about the first way, David.
Sure. Thank you, Tom. So the dev to ops arrow denotes the engineering of the software pipeline, getting what the developers are producing out into the field as quickly as possible. And we'll get to that a little more on the next slide. And of course, none of this works if you don't have visibility into how your apps are performing in the wild and in production. And so the second way is this continuous intelligence coming back from operations to development. And the third way I call the forgotten way. What happens here, there's this constant process of continuous improvement, which of course is enabled by continuous experimentation and continuous learning. So they're very tightly interwoven. So I'm wondering if I could get Christine to comment on the second way. So part of what Embrace does is help people who are worried about operations with respect to their mobile app and giving them the best information possible to feed back to the dev. So I was wondering, Christine, if you could say a couple of words about that.
Yeah, a lot of times, the ops people are really on the ground and they are helping customers or users with this problem. And so what ends up happening is these issues that pop up, it really flows back into development, making it a lot better and improving the product.
Great, thank you, Christine. So I wanted to talk about some of the sort of classic material that our listeners can go and reach for when they're done with this webinar and they want to know more. And I wanted to start out with a book by Nicole Forsgren and a couple of authors on called Accelerate. And one of the things that they give voice to in this book are the 4 KPIs for DevOps: lead time for changes, deployment frequencies, time to restore service, and change failure rate. So Tom, I wanted to sort of start with you again. Can you give me your interpretation as you've read and reflected on this book in the couple of years it's been out? Tom, are you there? I think we've gone. Okay, so I'll try and I'll try and give a little more voice to this. So one of the things that this book to do is separate change where you're trying to be proactive, where you're sort of pushing something through the software delivery pipeline, and you're creating this flow from dev to ops. And the title of the book implies that you want to do this quickly, but of course you want to do it reliably as well. And then the other place that you have to respond, if you will, in terms of getting this to work well is when you're in a reactive mode, not a proactive mode. So if you're restoring service after an outage, or you're responding to a security incident, or whatever that. So there's this proactive and reactive phase. And I would argue, in spite of the title of this slide, that there's a science to this, but there's also an art to this. So Christine, can you say a little bit about what you see with respect to how your customers sort of plan and react to changes in their operations as they worry about mobile apps?
Yeah, just to give a little background as to why I can speak on this topic. So at Embrace, we work with a ton of mobile teams, and I've seen teams like Wish and OkCupid, who started off with just a few mobile developers, grow into very large teams. And so I've seen kind of the transformation of mobile over time. And, as the years have passed, it's been easier to release an app, and the process of getting approval from the App Store has gotten faster. But the difference in mobile is truly that every single release has to be perfect. They are coding for perfection. And so there's a lot of pressure for every single release, because you may release something with a bug that crashes, and that release will forever be out there. There will always be someone, even if it's just one person, that hasn't updated their app and is living with it. And so there's a lot of pressure in mobile to code to perfection for each and every release, because that release will stay out in the wild.
Okay, Christine, I could say a little more about that, because listening to you talk, I'm thinking, well, okay, so there's a bad release out there. Don't we just push another one and have it right over the last one? Isn't this a quote unquote easy thing to recover from? So I guess, could you say a little more about where you see your customers get into trouble and how they recover, what that looks like?
Yeah, it's different from web. You can't just push out a change that everyone starts to see. Someone has to actively update the app in order to get that new version of the app where you've fixed the crash. And a lot of times people are hesitant to do that. You do have, early adopters, but there are a few people that will just stay in the old version of the app. And so that's why a lot of developers have to do extremely extensive testing prior to going out into production and really think about like what the impact is. And you don't want to do, a ton of patches or a ton of fast fixes. You kind of want to keep the release train going. And a lot of mobile teams have a strict 2 weeks. I'm going to set a release. And unless it is catastrophic, they will not break that cycle.
Great, thank you, Christine. I wanted to move on and talk about what in the DevOps world we call unicorns. And unicorns are what you think magical, mysterious beasts, and you actually want to learn from them. So I want to focus on a couple, one of which is very established and one of which is, I'll call a new kid on the block, even though they're now a publicly traded company. So Google founded this movement called site reliability engineering. And one of the things we'll get to in a minute and get Tom and Christine to react to is, well, how is this different in the mobile work? One of the things that Google has done really well is they've continually improved, and they've created a good bridge between what their web team and what their mobile team does. Zoom had a sort of, I'll call it, non-linear adoption function as we experienced the global pandemic that is COVID-19, and so that one of the things we watch them do well is not only adapt to things like web and mobile, but also reacting to a lot of negative perceptions about their security. So I'm wondering, Tom, if you can speak to lessons learned as you've watched Google grow up and Zoom deploy, and watch the user experience of those of these applications, how you think we've learned from them.
Yeah, certainly, David. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Thank you. And so when we first talked on the very first slide, we talked about the importance of teamwork, and I think you'd find that these two organizations have world-class DevOps teams. And what I mean by that is that they follow teamwork principles and practices probably better than just about anyone else. And they're doing things like treating each other with empathy and treating each other cordially and working together in tight-knit organizations and so forth. I just see teamwork as the main differentiator for both these organizations. I haven't worked for either of them. This is just my kind of DevOps view as an observer, observing them out in the wild.
Great, thank you, Tom. Christine, I wonder if there's a mobile angle that you've seen these companies evolve through and sort of step up to the next level in what they're doing, and if you've seen this in the marketplace.
Yeah, I've definitely seen how mobile teams have changed. And so at the beginning, you will have a handful of developers, maybe one iOS and one Android developer, and the mobile team is fairly siloed. They work on their own, they fix their own bugs, and they pretty much keep to themselves. But what I've seen in the past few years is that mobile is really driving revenue for a lot of companies. And so as mobile starts increasing the amount of revenue that it contributes, and in a lot of places surpassing web, what ends up happening is you have the team grows and they can't manage all of the code. When you have one or two people, it's pretty easy to know what changes have been made. You can communicate them, it's very easy, but as mobile grows and it becomes a bigger part of revenue, you have a ton of feature teams working on the app. And so what ends up happening is you have a core mobile platform team, and that team basically monitors the platform, makes sure that there is nothing that goes wrong, so that the feature teams can focus on building the app and building the new features that'll increase adoption and increase revenue. And so it does become a pretty significant adjustment for mobile teams. And it is, I've seen companies go through this very painful experience of kind of growing up and having to have a mobile specific DevOps type team, because mobile is quite a different beast.
Okay, thank you, Chris. So I wanted to actually skip ahead to this slide, because you kind of set it up perfectly. So there's some similarities in mobile and web. CI/CD is fairly well established since Tumblebook now, that's been out for a decade. You have this rule that you don't check in code without testing and make sure that's automated, and people have moved to infrastructure as code. But what you're articulating, Christine, is that application management is quite different in the mobile world. And so mobile DevOps is different. Configuration management, deployment is different, monitoring is different. So Tom, I'm wondering if you can say a little bit about the genesis of this work. This is highlighting work that I know you were involved with back at Booz Allen Hamilton. When you were working on this, did you have this web mobile sort of duality in your mind, or were these foundational principles that you were laying down for the practice that you were working in at Booz Allen?
Oh, what a great question, David. And I just want to kind of reiterate what Christine just said, and I just find it fascinating that that there is this mobile DevOps movement, if you will, or this mobile DevOps initiative within organizations. I do see it as the obvious kind of continuation of the DevOps movement. We've had DevOps for a good 12, 11 years, and so it makes sense that that it's gonna go into different directions, such as mobile DevOps. And to kind of just circle back to your question, David, just inherently, I do not work in mobile, and I have not really in my career, but there's just like obvious differences between mobile and the web. For example, just the platforms, right? Every shop that I know is for web is really kind of developing for one platform, one highly standardized platform. For example, the Linux operating system, and they're building tooling and projects and processes on that platform. But there's multiple platforms in the mobile space, not only Android and iPhone, but all the different versions that are available in the wild. And I'd love to kind of circle back with Christine and just kind of check that with you, Christine. And I think I'm kind of circling in on config management is just highly different in a mobile space, and mobile DevOps would be considerably different in management of your configurations, just for that simple reason that the operating systems and the platforms are so divergent and so different in the mobile space. Does that ring true?
Yes. Yeah, that's definitely true. For mobile, there are a number of different variables. So with web, you have your servers. It's a pretty predictable environment that you're working with. With mobile, there are, like you mentioned, different operating systems. And each operating system, for example, has its own rules. For example, iOS, you can't be blocking the main thread for too long in the background, or the operating system will kill your app. Then you also have differences in all of the different devices, especially in Android. It's highly fragmented. You have Samsung devices, you have Redmi devices, Huawei devices. And each one is slightly different. And then you have the added complexity of whether or not the person has connectivity. Are they on Wi-Fi or are they on cellular? And then there are the additional factors of, are they putting themselves in low power mode? Are they, are they changing certain settings on their phone? And so you throw all of these variables in there, and it becomes extremely difficult for a mobile developer to really recreate that environment and understand what interaction actually caused the issue. There are so many different things that once you change one aspect of it, it flows through and causes changes and creates a different expectation of results. And you cannot possibly test for all of those infinite possibilities.
Great, thank you,
That
Christine.
is truly fascinating, Christine. It just sounds like such a challenging environment, and I think you covered the configuration management aspects of mobile very well. If it's okay with everyone, I think I'm going to continue on to continuous deployment and just how different that is. I find, with my limited vision into the mobile space.
Please.
And so just to put it out there, in the web world, for example, behemoths like Netflix, deploy, to production, like 8,000 times a day. They have this one standardized environment that they can just make these little, feature changes all day long in this very sophisticated blue-green continuous delivery, continuous deployment way. And that just isn't true of mobile, right? Like, you just don't have control of the edge devices, the mobile devices. You just can't upgrade willy-nilly. You have to what's the right word? You have to group them together into holistic patches, and then push those patches out through the iPhone or the Android capabilities and so forth. It's just different. Does that ring true as well, Christine? What do you think?
Yes, definitely. Every release, there are a number of changes that happen at the same exact time. And so a lot of mobile developers, wait with bated breath when there's a new release, because they are checking the stability. They're making sure that the app isn't crashing. They're making sure that the new endpoints that they've added are working properly. They can't just deploy one small change at a time and see how it works. They throw out a lot of different changes every time that they release.
And then managing those changes has its own effect, and it's like a square root problem, right? Like the changes have changes, have changes, have changes, have changes. It's really intense, challenging environment. This conversation is really just opening my eyes to that. And I think, and you're obviously in your wheelhouse is continuous monitoring, right? Like, I think simplistically, from my perspective, you just can't do continuous monitoring the way you can with web servers, because you can't control the communication between you and the edge devices, right? Maybe they're on Wi-Fi this minute, maybe they're on 5G, excuse me, not 5G, maybe they're on 4G the next minute, and whether or not you're sending back monitoring data is like going to be using their data plan. And I mean, you just can't get continuous monitoring. Is that an incorrect assumption, or is that a correct assumption?
I think you can monitor, and you can monitor regularly, but again, it's very difficult to pinpoint what is contributing to any issue that does pop up during the monitoring process. And I think that there is a lot of information that developers are blind to, especially with mobile, because they rely on SDKs to give them information. I mean, recently, for example, Facebook had an issue with their SDK and was causing a ton of apps to crash. But the thing is, like, the mobile developers can't control that. They rely on Facebook, to help them sign people in and work with their app. But, even if there is a problem, they can't fix the code. And they're heavily reliant on other SDKs to provide some of these extra functionalities that are expected of them.
Wow, I just find that so fascinating. I'm sure you're aware of this axiom, and maybe some of our listeners aren't, but you can't manage something unless you can monitor it, right? And so, as if I were in charge of a mobile development team or whatever, I would just be so interested in the monitoring and how you accomplish that, and what's the best metrics you can get out of your apps. Like that example you gave of the Facebook SDK is kind of frightening, right?
Yeah.
You just have no control over it. You need to somehow get control over it. How do you do that? I would argue through monitoring.
Yes.
So Tom, you've done a great job of setting up our next conversational track. So if it is the case that you're hungry for information as a mobile developer, you have your ops team scrambling to try and figure out what's including these dependencies. I'm putting up this slide, MoOps KPIs, fact or fiction. So, can't really have crash-free sessions. No, there's no such thing as a crash-free user. But what else? What else can you monitor? What else is real in terms of what you put your hand on and measure it? And is there any hope for this notion of having a key performance indicator for your mobile developers? And
Yeah,
I'll open this up to either of you. Sorry.
yeah, I'd love to speak on that. A lot of mobile developers right now focus on crash-free sessions or crash-free users because that's been the main metric that everything has been based on. But most apps have a crash-free session rate of 99.9%, meaning 0.1% of their sessions crash. But as you guys know, when you're playing with a mobile app, there are so many different things outside of a crash that can happen. You can have a blank screen. You can have, an extremely slow purchase or an extremely slow startup. And so that is actually just one facet of what you can monitor. And what I like to tell our customers is you want to monitor stability. So it goes beyond crashes. You want to monitor crashes, out of memory exceptions, ANR exits, user terminations when users force quit the app. That's all a part of stability. Then you want to monitor performance. How fast are you doing these things? These key parts of the app, the startup, the login, the purchase. Are you doing it quickly, or are people getting stuck and bored and leaving the app during these key parts of your funnel? And then lastly, I have these overarching metrics that I like to tell people to monitor. For example, percentage of users or sessions in low power mode, or percentage of sessions or users that have a low memory warning, and then battery drainage. So that tells you if you've made changes and it's affected, if it's created a memory leak, or if it's created severe battery drainage. There are a lot of things to consider with mobile.
So,
I just
Christina,
find,
yeah, go ahead, Tom.
oh, thank you, David. I just find that to be just so effective and so important and so interesting and so obvious, right? It's just all the metrics and the things that you listed out are certainly things you have to be cognizant of. Like I think one of your examples was out of memory, or how often the user actually terminates the app. I mean, I haven't had to terminate an app on my iPhone in recent memory, but that's certainly something you just need to know about. Like, it's just just putting myself in the mobile space, mobile shoes. It appears just so important. Thank you for
Yeah.
the education.
Yeah, and one thing that I like to tell mobile teams is that, stability is table stakes now. Nobody expects your app to crash ever. It's a very rare situation to happen. And so now what you're competing on is performance. And so you have a lot of competing apps that do the same thing. For example, you may have on your phone DoorDash, Postmates, Uber Eats. And if you open one app and the startup isn't fast enough, you just move on to the next one. They're almost interchangeable. And so what becomes the differentiating factor is performance.
And does that have analogs to the web space? I think it does, right? Like, that was something that we kind of learned in the early days, right? Like, if your email client is not performant, you could end up losing the race, right? And so I can completely visualize what you're saying.
Yeah, and Amazon has done studies to see, if they speed up page loads by 100 milliseconds, it has significant impact on revenue. It's just these split-second things that sometimes, it pushes people towards buying or not. And so there's definitely been a lot of research on the website about how performance has increased revenue and increased engagement for a lot of web apps.
It reminds me of one of the discussions we had when we were getting ready for this webinar, Christine, and it's the role of the MRE, right, the mobile reliability engineer. And performance and stability are both components of the traditional site reliability engineer position. Certainly, it's true of the mobile reliability engineer as well. Would you agree or disagree?
Yeah, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to return to, sort of the next level of thinking about what possible KPIs are of mobile DevOps, and try and get some deeper thoughts on this. So we've talked about broad user support, even broad device support, and how hard that is. We've talked about stability and performance, and how you really need both, which can create a paradox. And Christine, you talked us through the importance of understanding the flows of the user experience, and how that can be tied to business outcomes. But I wanted to shift over to the left for a minute. So one of the challenges that developers have when they see these, even if they're fairly rare events, they need to understand what they're seeing. What is the time to properly identify the problem? What sort of problem is it, and what potential impact does it? I wanted to open it up to either of you to talk about that. What is the critical thing, or the critical tools that can help them properly identify the sort of they see, and what problems are most common?
Tom, do you want to talk about DevOps and how that's evolved with, the time to properly identify and how that's changed over time?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So, in kind of a recent job search of mine, I did notice there's a lot more requirements around identification of problems in the world that I live in, and the world I live in is the web world. And there's various tooling that have come out over the last 5 or 6 years around Java, and sorting out various Java performance issues and systemic issues and so forth. And I would expect those tools to be the same in the mobile world, especially for the back end. But I think I'd have to defer to you, Christine, on what tooling there is on the front end. Actually, when I say the front end, I mean the actual mobile app running on a mobile client. Do you have any visibility into that?
Yeah, the tooling is for mobile is fairly fragmented. So a lot of tools focus on one thing. You have Firebase, where you are using it to look at crashes. You have Sentry for logging. You use New Relic to monitor networking. And so what ends up happening is when there's a problem, you have all of these different tools where you're collecting relevant information, but it's not in one place. And so a lot of times mobile developers will start with crashes, and then they'll kind of move on to the other mobile tools that they have. And if that doesn't work, they'll go into Mixpanel and they'll try and trace the user path. And it doesn't always work out. And so it becomes a very difficult endeavor to try and identify the source of the issue, because they can't really identify what even happened. And so that is like the big problem. And with our tool Embrace, what we like to do is we put all of that information in one place. We have all of your logging, all of your network calls, and the sequencing in one place, so that you can take a look at it and see, hey, is it an API call that's causing this issue? Is it possibly an SDK that isn't even related to any of my code? And then you can kind of route these problems to the relevant parties. What becomes difficult is, because this code is so intertwined and so many people have touched the code, it does become difficult as the app grows and as the team grows to properly identify what the source of the issue is.
Great. Thank you, Tom, and thank you, Christine. So I'm mindful of the time here. I wanted to put up a summary slide and open it up to both of you. As we've talked about this today, and obviously the thinking evolves during a conversation, what has really spoke to you that you'd like to highlight from our audience, and what takeaway would you like to give them from our conversation before we open it up for questions?
Do you mind if I go first, Christine? I actually have something top of mind.
Yeah, go for it.
Thank you. And so really, the message that I'd like to impart, to the listeners and the viewers is that digital transformation is difficult, right? It's incredibly difficult. There's all these cultural and technological and people and process and all these issues that really go along with it. And I just wanted to be a cheerleader for everyone out in listening land, and just say, be brave. Be brave in your mobile transformation efforts. Be brave in your digital transformation efforts. Be brave in your DevOps transformation efforts. It's a tough road, but the rewards are tremendous. And kind of going back to the beginning of the presentation, there's the KPIs from Accelerate that I think my mic wasn't working during that part, but those KPIs were distilled from 10,000 or so surveys, and so those are examples of the rewards that you can achieve through just this digital bravery that I'm talking about. But I just wanted to just say a message of good luck to everyone, and a message of best of luck to everyone listening. Thank you, and thank you for having me on.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. Christine, what shows up for you as you look at this slide and think about what you've talked about today and what we might have missed?
Yeah, so I mean, thinking about DevOps and how it's changed things and how it's morphed throughout the years, and it has taken a while for people to adopt, and now with mobile, things are changing very quickly, and as the years progress, everything changes much more quickly. I've seen a big push towards mobile, and I've seen teams that have struggled with making the shift to mobile because they blindly think that it's similar to web, and so all of the tooling and all of the problems are the same between web and mobile, and they're not. I would say have compassion for mobile developers. Their job is very, very difficult. The different environments that they have to deal with, the different types of issues, and all of the different factors that don't even relate to anything that they have control over. And the people that will come out of all of this and win are the people that recognize that mobile is extremely fragmented. It is complicated, and you have to start now. In order to develop the teams that really understand how to tackle these issues. And so I encourage teams that, may have a mobile app that they don't invest a ton in, or haven't invested a ton in mobile tools, to really think about, where you want the company to go, and kind of follow suit with where other companies have gone. They've really pushed mobile. It's an easier way to get to people. Instead of sending emails about promotions, push notifications are extremely effective. And so you get users with higher carts, higher lifetime values for these customers. And so really it's accepting mobile and all its complicated baggage with it.
Great, thank you, Christine. No, that's so important to keep in mind for our listeners that are working in this space. So Tom, I return to sort of a question for you about digital transformation and how important it is, and what the potential reward. I'm wondering what challenges that adopters of DevOps should expect, and what your experience has taught you about overcoming them.
Yeah, what a great question, David. There's quite a bit of FUD, and if anyone's not heard this expression before, or this acronym before, it's fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And so I basically, in my work, in my transformation work, try and minimize those feelings, or at least validate those feelings, and then try and work with them every day. So there's fear about automation, there's uncertainty about the long-term prospects of their jobs, and there's doubt about just the effectiveness of all this kind of DevOps stuff that's going on. And so it's extremely challenging, but worthwhile. You know, if we just go back to the Accelerate book once again, you know, there's an entire book about why we should do mobile DevOps or DevOps in general, or DevSecOps, which is the security version of DevOps, or networking DevOps, you know, or you know, there's all these fragmentation in the DevOps community. But if we get down to the brass tacks, just pursuing these capabilities is beneficial. People are happier that they are more productive. People are happier that they're working better on a team. And when we talk about DevOps in terms of productivity and teamwork, I think everyone can very easily grasp its benefits and its importance. And I apologize, Dave. I've kind of lost the thread of your original question. Did I answer it, or did I?
No,
I
think you did. I think you did, and I appreciate it, Tom. So, Christine, I wanted to talk to you as we were preparing for this webinar. One of the things we talked about was, you know, what a head start the web space has. You know, so web sort of became white hot in the mid 90s, and it wasn't for 15 years later that mobile has had caught on and got really hot. So it's had a decade, maybe a little more run of sort of evolving, and I'm wondering, in the DevOps world, we have these unicorns that we learned from. You know, what were people doing 15 and 20 years ago in terms of what did they do in terms of their culture and their processes and their tooling? Are there unicorns in the mobile space? And if you've observed them, what lessons can our audience take away from the people who have sort of develop best practices and are starting to put them into action? How do they take this? You know, I think about when we were talking about all the challenges of mobile, and I get the sense it's a bit of a nightmare right now. You know, what best practices are out there in terms of the KPIs and what people can do proactively to be able to sleep at night as they're deploying these apps?
Yeah. So I mean, with with mobile, you've seen some mobile first companies come out that have done very well. And I've talked to developers like that have come from Uber and have come from Instagram. Those are very heavy mobile first apps. And I've asked them about their tooling and just to understand what they've built internally, because they have a number of developers that work for them, you know, so they have the resources to build things internally, and they have the volume, and they care about optimizing to the nth degree. And what they've built is just this interesting tool that's actually very similar to Embrace, where they have to collect everything for every single user. They want to understand, for example, the networking calls, what happens versus what doesn't happen. And unless you get a complete picture of what the user path is, it's pretty difficult to troubleshoot. And so the tooling has gone far beyond just monitoring and sampling. Because every individual instance is so unique, what you want to do is when someone complains, you want to be able to look at the device and see, okay, what path did they take and what contributed to this error? And so the tooling that they've put together is very unique and extremely complicated. And it gets increasingly complicated as new OSs come out and updates to the OSs come out. And it's very difficult for smaller mobile teams that aren't as large as Uber or Instagram to keep up with it. But there are very simple KPIs that I think mobile developers can adopt and monitor just to really get a good feel for how their app is doing. A really broad good one for stability is the percentage of sessions with cold starts. And so every time there is a cold start, it's either because the app has crashed and you're restarting it, or it's been terminated and restarted, or it's crashed in the background and it's restarted. So you want to make sure that that number is stable. That's a good stability number. For performance, I like to track the timing for startup. How long does it take for a user to start interacting with your app? That's a really great place to start. And you want to keep it below 1 to 2 seconds. And then, oh,
Okay,
sorry.
got it. No, got it. No, I think it's fascinating. So one of the things I was reflecting on as I think back on our conversation today, we've put a number of book covers up there, perhaps not accidentally. They're book covers from O'Reilly and IT Revolution Press, Kim's organization. I'm wondering if you see a future where the sort of practices you're articulating, Christine, could be organized into a book, or are they still so squishy or amorphous at this point that, well, if we started to write the book, by the time we were done, it would all change? So is this field changing so quickly that it's too early to write a book, or is it time?
I think it's time. I think that a lot of people kind of, and I've seen it independently with various customers that we've talked to, come to the same conclusions. They really start off with stability, they focus on that, they focus on crashes, and really they end up going to performance. And that's where they shine, and that's where they differentiate. So there's definitely a path that several, mobile apps have followed independently without knowing what other teams are doing.
Okay, that's very helpful. Tom, I'm wondering if I could kick over to me. So Christine has put it out there. She's going to be the editor-in-chief of this book. Which chapter would you be most passionate about writing? Where would you see your contribution in this space?
Gosh, you're really putting me on the spot, David.
I
So
am.
you're gonna laugh, but do you see there being an opportunity for a teamwork chapter in this book, Christine? I would love to do that.
Yes.
Mhm.
So can I pull on that thread just a bit, Tom? So one of the incredibly important things that for both Agile and DevOps and adopting that mindset and going through that transformation is the notion of cross-functional teaming. So what advice would you give people? Maybe I'm stealing your thunder in your chapter of sort of organizing and putting forward cross-functional teaming in the context we've been talking about today.
So I think I'm going to repeat something that I really connected with that Christine said, and I think she had several. Just to give her props, I think she had several mic drops on this. My eyes went real wide a couple times when she was talking. But one of those things was compassion for the mobile developer. The stuff that I learned about today on this call is the mobile developer deserves compassion. They have it really rough. They really do. Amen, right? And so they're dealing with a lot of different. It's not just soft. When we began, we talked about software and it being this change, this exercise in change. The mobile developers have the square root problem where they're dealing with all these different complex, with much more complex environment, and they, like they said, they deserve all this compassion, and that's really my big takeaway. In an answer to your question, just compassion for the mobile developers, and having the teams be empathetic and compassionate to each other. But once again, the poor old mobile developers deserve more. That's really one of my takeaways.
Yeah, that's a great point, Tom. So I'm also mindful of the time here. So I wanted to go first with final thoughts, and then I wanted to kick it over to Christine and then Tom. So my final thoughts for the day, first of all, I wanted to thank Embrace for hosting today and thank Christine and Tom for providing such great insights into this conversation and the evolution from DevOps as it was sort of started out in the web and desktop app world to this new world where mobile is, Christine has articulated, mobile first, maybe even getting most of your revenue from mobile, and it's not getting the attention it's deserved. So hopefully this conversation has shifted the audience's thinking in that regard. So Final thoughts, please.
I'm gonna be repeating myself. It's just be good to each other, everyone. The mobile developers once again deserve as much compassion as you can create, and just be good to each other out there. And that's really kind of my parting comment. But I also wanted to say how much gratitude I have for being asked to be on this webinar and working with Christine, having all these eye-opening moments. It's been a real pleasure, Christine and David. Thank you to you both.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Tom. Yeah, I want to thank David and Tom. Working on this webinar was great, and to echo what Tom said, it really is it is difficult for mobile developers, but it creates an exciting opportunity for people to be better. There is so much room for teams to be better because a lot of teams are catching up. And mobile's been around for about 10 years, but people are still figuring it out. And so there's definitely a lot of room for companies to kind of outcompete their competitors in the mobile space. And that's what I'm very excited about.
Yeah, I'm particularly I'm sitting here with a summary slide in front of me, and because I teach this stuff, I've seen some of it before, but I think these mobile DevOps KPIs in the top right are really important. I think having mobile developers and mobile operations folks have the right tools to properly identify what they're seeing, understand the why, the fact that stability and performance are both critical. Broad user support is a big challenge along the way, but there's better and better tools now for helping there. And Christine, you returned to this a number of times, so I'd like to hear some more about it since we have a couple minutes left. The idea that by understanding the user experience, understanding that the flows that they navigate through the app, these really are critical to understand the connections between the app and business outcomes that the enterprise is interested in. So I'm wondering if you just as a closing, you can say a little bit about more of that. What is going on there that's exciting you about tying these KPIs to business metrics that matter to a CFO or someone on the business side of the house?
Yeah, there are small, tiny changes that developers can make to their mobile apps that have a big impact on the bottom line. And so, I mean, it's been heavily researched on the website. And I think there is less rhetoric on the mobile side, but it doesn't mean that those concepts still don't apply. And so if you have a strong mobile app that works quickly, you are able to get people engaged. You're able to get people to buy more. I'm on my phone all the time. And when I'm in front of my laptop, I'm actually just working. So it is a better opportunity. Yeah, it's a great opportunity to get people to buy. My laptop is now, it is for productive type work. I only do extensive like web forms on there or really big purchases, but my impulse buys and a lot of my interactions are on my phone. It's simple, it's easy, and it really gets to what I need to do. And so more and more people are moving towards it. And so that's really where you want to meet your audience. That's where the engagement is, and that's where the money is.
Well said. Thank you, Christine. Tom, I'm wondering about your thoughts on this. We're on the other coast from Christine and the other folks at Embrace, but we've gone through a lot of the pandemic here, just as they have on the West Coast. How has your life with mobile changed during the pandemic? What are you using it for that's different versus what you were doing a couple of, maybe 4 months ago now?
I think you both will laugh. I'm actually bouncing between 3 devices. I have my iPad, and then it does have a keyboard, and then I have my iPhone, and then I have my MacBook. And whether a app supports all 3, I'll just throw a shout out to, like, for example, Todoist, which is my to-do list manager, and how well they support all 3 and how well they keep all my data synced. Where if anyone who knows me, I'm this kind of digital productivity nerd, and so that's the type of things that I look for in an app. It's how well does it work across all of my platforms, and how productive am I, and how well does it work, and the amount of, I'm sure Christine could comment on this, but the amount of engineering that goes into making all of those three platforms work correctly and adequately and well is just tremendous, right? Like I think Todoist has like 80 or 90 employees, right? So I joke around with people, what else is a to-do list? Well, pen and paper, right? But
Right.
here's, they have this app that's wonderful, and I use it extensively.
It's a great example. So I need to bring things to a close here. I wanted to thank everyone in the audience joining us. Again, Tom and Christine, thank you for sharing your insights today. We're out of time for questions, but I would encourage you through the GoToWebinar mechanism that got you online. There's an opportunity to ask questions there, so please do so. And for those of you that registered for today's event and were available, we are going to make the PowerPoints available. So if you have questions as you go through those again, please reach out to us. And again, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Christine.
Thank you.